morning, everyone, and it is 9:30, and it is the East River Minnesota Regional Water Supply Authority Board of Directors meeting on October 1st, 2021, and Commissioner Langford is going to help us with the invocation. Please rise with your
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you today, Lord. We just thank you for all that you do for us. We thank you for this beautiful country we live in, Lord. And we want to lift up our men and women, dear Heavenly Father, that protect us and serve us. We just ask that you watch over them and keep your hand of protection upon them at all times. Lord, we lift up this pandemic that still seems to be bothering us, Lord. We just lift it up, and we ask that you just keep those families that's lost loved ones, that you just comfort them, dear Heavenly Father, during their time of loss. And Lord, be with those that are sick and ailing, and just help them to get better and back on their feet. And most of all, Lord, we just pray for this board. We pray for wisdom and knowledge today that we can make the right decisions that would best suit the authority. And we also pray for wisdom and knowledge on all the other folks, dear Heavenly Father, that are in leadership positions that make rules and laws that govern how we live in this country, Lord. We just ask that they have wisdom and knowledge also. And all these things we ask in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I know I'm repeating myself, but it's awful nice when everybody stands and in a loud, crisp voice happily does the pledge. Thank you all for that. With that, we're going to do our usual welcome of guests, and then we're going to have the host county is going to give us some remarks. So why don't we start there in my right, your left, front row, and work our way through the audience so we know who you are, just in case we need to know.
Certainly, Commissioner. Amy Burnham with Stantec. I'll be talking to you during the workshop on pipeline connection fees.
Okay,
Good morning, Mandy Hines, DeSoto County.
you're up next, ma'am.
Okay.
Good morning, Richard Anderson with the Authority.
Good morning, Terry Holcomb with Authority staff.
Good morning, Ford Risk with the Authority staff.
Ann Lee with the Authority staff. Sylvia Altman with DeSoto County.
Brad Hayes with Woodland and Cover.
Mark Jones with CHA.
Jessica Benson from the Authority.
Justin Vasky from Sarasota County.
Brooke Bailey, Sarasota County.
Good morning, Ryan Cavallari with AE Pound. Jim Guida, Progressive Water Resources.
John Ferguson, Southwest Florida Water Management District.
Chip Chaffee, the Authority.
Kevin Morris with Manatee County.
Katie Gilmore, Benson County. Shelina Odegaard with the Authority.
Rob Wilson, Authority staff.
Erica Stone, Sam Stone's daughter. Darlene Stone, Sam Stone's wife.
I'm the old guy that's responsible now.
Dale Pearson, Ardura.
Joseph Jones, Sarasota County.
Good morning, Katie Judy with HDR Engineering.
Doug Brumfield with Terry.
Kathleen Knapp, Terry's mom. Might be Terry.
Morning, Gregory, Charlotte County. Mike Milet, Sarasota County.
Doug Ekman with Kimley Horn.
Jean Stacio, Charlotte County.
Dorian Popescu, DMK. John Canfield, Authority staff.
Tony Olafitano, Authority staff.
Morning, Mike Knowles, Arcades.
Angel Yasna, Government Solutions.
Bob Cushing, Rural Engineers.
Okay, I think that does it. Ms. Hines, I think you have 2 hours to welcome us.
Thank you.
I just wanted to, once again, I'll repeat myself, as we always say at the authority board meetings, it's such a pleasure to have a partnership with our neighboring counties, especially when it comes to the important aspect of water resources. But our partnerships go beyond that. We have lots of opportunity. We work really close with Sarasota and Charlotte, and Manatee's always a good friend and neighbor as well, and we appreciate that relationship. So I have nothing more to say other than to welcome you. We're always happy to host you. There are refreshments in the back because I promised Mike Coates that I would make sure that you were good and alert and full of sugar for the excitement of today's meeting. So welcome to each of you.
Okay, well, thank you. It's great to be here. The first item on the agenda is item number 1, employee service recognitions. And I think Mr. Coates is going to go down and help us with that.
Mr. Chair, board members, Mike Coates, the authority staff. The authority's employees are our most valuable resource, and we have a great group of employees at the Peace River facility and at the Lakewood Ranch. And today we're honoring 9 of those for service recognitions from 5 years up to 30 years. So what I'd like to do is read a little bit about each one of them, have them come up, and we'll give them these certificates. And like everything else, awards are hard to come by. There's a supply chain issue with getting awards. So what we have here today is a coupon for each one of them for an award to be named later. So with that, we start with Antonio Amalfito. Antonio started 21 years ago in the water business in Florida Water Incorporated in Lehigh Acres. He holds an A water plant operator license and an A distribution system license and a C wastewater collection license. Prior to coming to work for the authority, he worked for Bonita Springs Utilities. He loves fishing, boating, scuba diving, and treasure and fossil hunting. And he will soon be moving to Arcadia. He's closing on a house on October 11th here, so he'll be one of your neighbors.
Thank you. Just turn around.
Mike, that wasn't a budget problem, it was a supply chain problem. We need to know if it's a budget
We'll
problem.
need an amendment to the budget. Yep. Next one is Jessica Benson. Jessica joined the authority in 2016 as our agency clerk, and she's advanced through our administrative group to accounting associate in 2017. And in 2020, she was promoted to be our human resources coordinator, and she is our human resources department, in fact. Jessica received her BA in psychology and a master's degree in human resource management from Florida International University. And I'd like to point out that Jessica, she completed her master's degree program while she was working full-time with the authority and with help from her husband Chris and 2 small children. So no small feat on her part. In her free time, Jessica enjoys spending time with her family outdoors, visiting local beaches, rollerblading, and catching up with her twin sister. Jessica? Next is Terry Brumfield. Terry joined the authority as a temporary hire in 2016. She quickly became a member of our Water Resources group as an administrative assistant too. Terry is the first impression most visitors at the ranch house see, and her positive attitude and helpful nature ensures that the staff and visitors alike feel welcome and at home. Originally from Connecticut, she currently lives in Northport with her Texan and cowboy fan husband Doug. She has 2 grown children, Robert and Megan, and 1 very spoiled grandchild. Terry? Jonathan Canfield. John grew up in Charlotte County, graduated from Charlotte High School. He joined the Air Force right after school, served 4 years, including 1 year in Iraq. His hobbies are going to the gym, spending time with his wife and daughter, going outdoors camping, hiking, fishing, or just playing. He enjoys the Peace River work atmosphere and his co-workers at the authority. John? You can't tell he spends any time at the gym. All right. Earl Chaffey, Chip is what we call it. Chip is an Air Force veteran, originally from Vermont. He's been a mechanic and a welder for more than 30 years, 5 of those with the authority. He holds a Class 3 distribution operator license and is certified in backflow repair. He has 3 grandchildren and 1 grandchild, and enjoys spending his time hunting. Chip? Last on the 5-year recognitions is Rob Wilson. Rob is our IT network administrator, which means he's responsible for keeping our computer communications system, other than the SCADA system, safe, running, and up to date. He does a terrific job of that. Excuse me. We got to test drive Rob for about 2 years before he actually came to work for us. He worked for our service provider, our IT service provider at the time. And so we liked his work. He liked us, and so we ended up coaching him from them. Rob can fix almost anything mechanical or electrical, which is a handy skill since he builds car motors and then he blows them up on a routine basis. Rob and his fiance have recently moved from Bradenton area to the wide open spaces of DeSoto County, so he again is another one of your neighbor. You got a whole group of folks from the authority moving to DeSoto County. So Rob, come on down.
Speaking of coaching, Rob, call me. 10-year award, Shelina Odegaard.
Shelina began her career with the authority in 2011 as an environmental specialist 1. She's been working on her water resources group, performing compliance monitoring on our ASR and reservoir system. Shelina's attention to detail and personal initiative have been invaluable to the success of our compliance program, and that's reflected in her current position as an environmental specialist 3. Shelina has her Bachelor of Science in Marine Science and Biology with a minor in chemistry from the University of Tampa. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her 3 fur babies, 2 Yorkies, and 1 cat, and pursuing all things outdoors. And I'm going to get tired even reading this. Fishing, kayaking, traveling, camping, hiking, biking, running, yoga, cooking, baking, reading, piano, sewing, quilting, crafting, gardening, organizing, and cleaning. She's a busy girl. So, Shelina. All right, 30-year award. Sam Stone is our Environmental Land Services Manager. Sam is a native, is a Florida cracker, born and raised in Plant City. He is the authority's original employee. Came to work for the authority in June 1991. It was the first full-time employee hired after the authority acquired the Peace River facility in 1991. Sam has a bachelor's degree in biology with a minor in chemistry from Florida Southern College. He also earned his drinking water operator license B in 1979. Before coming to work for the authority, Sam had worked as a project manager and lab director for General Development Utilities at the Peace River facility since 1980. So he's been there for 41 years. Sam is our Land and Environmental Services Manager. He takes care of the reservoir system, the ASR system, RV Griffin Reserve, handling all of our field monitoring and environmental permits compliance systems. He's also in charge of the hydrobiological monitoring program of the Peace River, which he's been working on for more than 30 years now. He's also the original project manager for the Peace River ASR system, and has been involved in the expansion and management of that system since it's grown to be the largest in the eastern United States. Sam is the authority's historian. If something happened at the Peace River facility in the last 4 decades, he knows about it. And it's that continuity, that corporate knowledge and dedication by Sam that helps keep these facilities operating at peak performance. Sam and his beautiful wife, Darlene, who's back there, have been married 44 years, have 2 grown children, Erica, who's back here, and Samuel. They also have 4 grandchildren. But whenever he has the opportunity, Sam likes to get back to his Florida roots and go hunting and fishing, depending on who's biting, the mosquitoes or the fish. So Sam, come on down. If and when Sam ever retires, we have a whole list of Sandisms that we're going to put on T-shirts and give them out at the barbecue. And there's plenty of them, probably. There's 300 of them or so. So everybody will get a different one. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as chairman, one of my duties, unfortunately, is to point out mistakes that get made. And it pains me to say our new executive director has already made a major mistake. So with that, I'm going to ask Earl Commissioner Langford to correct that mistake publicly, and if you do it from up here or down there, whatever you choose, but just reinforce that it was a serious mistake.
I'm just excited the mic works, I'm gonna sit right here. That's a joke for a lot of y'all that may not know it, we haven't worked on there today, because they tend to work when they want to. But anyway, yes, we missed a 15-year milestone. I don't know if it was an accident or if it was on purpose. But anyway, Mr. Coatsy here, as most of us know him, he's been with Peace River, Minnesota Water Supply Authority since 2006, serving as Water Resources Director from 2006 until 2012, and Deputy Director of the agency from 2012 until his hire as Executive Director of the Authority in August of 2021. Mike is with a BS from Central Michigan youth, go Chippewas, and with a career spanning 41 years, including 6 years in oil and natural gas exploration, and in the past 35 years in Florida, working in utility operations and management, water resources evaluation, and water supply planning and development for the authority, Tampa Bay Water, and the South Florida and Southwest Florida Water Management Districts. He is a member of the American Water Works Association and the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. Mike and his wife Cheryl have 6 children and 4 grandchildren spread all over the country from Florida to Alaska. When he and Cheryl are not traveling to visit family, Mike is an avid fisherman and a boater, and is well known by some as the catfish king. Congratulations, Mike, and we have a coupon for you. Mike Coatsy. And then we have an official one too. Because he is the boss now, he probably makes some head roll over this, so we made him a professional too. There you go, buddy.
Congratulations.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
One more time.
Before we move on to the regular agenda, Mr. Stone, the 30-year veteran, this board will pay cash for stories that are embarrassing to any of the other employees. So just come and see us directly with that, all right? You must have the stories.
Chairman, may I right quick throw something in? I know we got two over 5 years I was listening real close, and 2 of y'all are DeSoto County residents or fixing to be.
That's right.
So I would advise you to make sure you register to vote, and I would love to be your favorite county.
That's perfect. Okay, we're on the consent agenda, and those will be on your agenda if you're following us, items 1 through 7. I have not been told, and I also went right past it, but we had no public comment. But I've been told that we have nothing pulled, so the chair will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items number 1 through 7.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Truex, seconded by Commissioner Langford. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Chair votes aye. That moves forward 4-0 in approval. All right, just bear with me. We're now on the regular agenda, item number 1. And Richard Anderson is going to help us with that. Hello, Richard.
Good morning, Commissioner, board members. Richard Anderson for the record. As usual, the water supply conditions, item 1. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. I know we have a busy day with the workshop and everything. Water supply conditions are really in excellent shape for this time of year as we wind up the end of the rainy season. As you can see here, here's the rainfall for the last 2 years. It's followed a pretty average normal pattern. For the last 3 months, we've had July, we had over 9 inches, August over 6 inches, and through September, almost 8 inches. So 23 to 24 inches here in the last 3 months. As you'll see in a minute, it's really bolstered the flow in the river. So, take a look here at the river flow. As you can see, when I put the report together, September 15th, we were down to about 1,750 CFS. Right now, we're over 3,000 CFS. I don't have a pointer, but it's about at the blue dotted line for the average flow for this time of year. So we're in really good shape. I assume you're not seeing my slides? Or?
We are now.
Would you like me to start over or just keep going?
No,
Okay. I know it's exciting.
it's riveting.
It was the fault of a lousy chairman. We'll get that corrected.
And I can't explain the Catfish King if you really want to know a story.
Good.
Okay, as far as river withdrawals, we're full in the surface water system right now. So we filled up in July and August, averaging about 51 MGD for those 2 months. Right now, we're only taking about 15 MGD out just to keep the system topped off and full. And we have plenty of water coming down the river, so we should be able to maintain a full status here, at least through the end of the year, it looks like, through the end of December. And here's an example of that. You can see we're right up to the permitted value. We're at about 6.45 billion gallons in the surface water system right now, so we're looking really good. As far as ASR storage, we have been using a little bit of ASR for some testing purposes that we're doing. We've been taking out about 100 million gallons every quarter to do some water quality sampling on that. So we took a little bit out here in September. Right now we're sitting at about 8.75 billion gallons in that system. And the usable volume is about 5.25. The red line is what we consider to be usable, about 60% of the total volume in that system. And our total estimated days of supply, right now, if we were to rely solely on our storage, both surface and ASR, we have about 409 days at our average daily flow, or 13 months. If we had to meet the 34.7 contractual obligations, we have about 11 months of storage in the system right now. So again, looking really good. As we shift over now to the demand and production side for August, total production was about 75 MGD. It's about 22 MGD from the authority system and right at 53 from your county and city facilities. About 3.2 of that went to the non-authority customers served by Manatee County. So the total usage for the authority system was 71.75. For Charlotte County, Charlotte used 10.3 from the authority, produced another about 0.4 from their broad store system for a total of 10.7 for the month of August. And DeSoto County, DeSoto used about half an MGD from the authority, another 0.3 from the correctional facility for a total of about 0.8 MGD for the month of August. Okay, Manatee County. Manatee County self-supplied to their customers about 37.4 MGD. They shipped another 3.4 to Sarasota County, and again the 3.2 to their 9 consecutive customers out on the coast. Total production from the Lake Manatee facility was 44.02. And Sarasota County used about 9.75 from the authority. Again, they imported about 3.5 MGD. They self-produced from the Carlton facility and University about 6.3 MGD. Total was about 19.5 MGD for the month of August. And then the city of Northport. City of Northport took about 1.5 MGD, 1.4 from the authority. Self-produced about 2 MGD. They supplied about 100,000 gallons a day back to Sarasota County. And then the total usage for them was 3.27 MGD for the month of August. Now if we look at the regional demands, this is all the numbers rolled up into one. You can see, looking back over the last 10 to 11 years, we've had an average growth rate of about 2.4 if you look at the long-term growth. The red line shows the previous 12 months. It doesn't show September, so we're not through this fiscal year yet. But you can see, if you look at 2020 compared to the red line, we are still seeing a nice jump in growth there from 76.4 to 77.7, an increase of about 1.4 MGD over last 12 months. If you look at the last 5 years, just from 2016 to now, that growth rate's about 2.6% over the regional system. So we are still seeing significant growth in the region. Water availability, as you can see, we still have 105 MGD of supply. This month in August, we used 75 MGD of that, still leaving about 30 MGD or 71% of the water that's utilized for the regional system. So with that, I know I went through it pretty quickly, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you.
Great shape. All right, we're on item number 2, purchase of the Project Prairie Pumping and Storage Facility in DeSoto County. And there's a motion there when we get to that point, and Terry Holcomb's going to help us.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioners, members of the board, Terry Holcomb with Authority staff. This item is presented for board consideration and approval of actually 4 recommended motions. Just to paraphrase, the first motion is approval of a interlocal agreement between DeSoto County and the authority for the regional acquisition of the Project Prairie facilities. Second motion is approval of a purchase and sale agreement for those facilities. The third motion would be to approve and authorize the executive director to execute an operational protocol agreement with DeSoto County and the authority. And then the fourth motion would be to authorize the executive director and general counsel to make any minor changes to those documents as needed for DeSoto County's approval of those documents. So just to orient ourselves in the region here, you can see the Project Prairie facilities are located in southwest DeSoto County. They're adjacent to US 17, and they're strategically located within the region with DeSoto County's distribution system to the north, and the city of Punta Gorda's water supply and distribution system to the south. I wanted to provide just a real quick brief history on the Project Prairie facilities. You can see US 17 there in the background of the photo. The Project Prairie facilities are just adjacent to US 17. And then the Walmart distribution center, that large facility, is just outside of that photo in the foreground. And in 2004, DeSoto County constructed the facilities primarily to provide water supply needed for the construction of the Walmart distribution center. In 2005, the authority's 20-inch diameter transmission main that runs down US 17 there connected into DeSoto County's facilities, and DeSoto County began supplying water to the Walmart distribution center through that connection to the regional system. At that time, DeSoto County transferred ownership of the facilities you see there in blue. That's the well, the aeration system, clear well, the RO building to the authority. But they retained the items you see there circled in red. They retained the storage tank, it's a 500,000 gallon storage tank, the high service pumping station, chemical feed system, and generators. So in 2007, the water use permit associated with the well was transferred over to the authority from DeSoto County. And in 2013, we took those quantities and transferred them into one of our own water use permits. In 2019, the authority was completing the phase 1 pipeline. We were under construction, and it was going down right down 17 to the city of Punta Gorda Shell Creek plant. And county staff and the authority staff engaged in discussions about the purchase of those remaining facilities at Project Prairie. So we had our consultant Stantec do a valuation assessment on those facilities, and that included a condition assessment of the assets as well as a valuation, and it came up to be approximately $748,000, $749 if you round up $1,000. So we took that and we brought it to the board with an interlocal agreement, purchase and sale agreement, and the operational protocol in draft form in June of 2020. The board approved those documents, but it was contingent upon receipt of funding from the Water Management District. We had not at the time put in, because it was predated the discussions, funding for the 21 cooperative funding year. So the Water Management District suggested we come back for FY22. We did, we submitted the application, we were approved, the project was ranked high, and we are back to the board again to approve those documents. The benefits of this regional system, acquiring the project area facilities, obviously it improves water availability to both the Peace River facility in Punta Gorda, provides backup supply to DeSoto County, and it provides an opportunity for a location for blending or additional chemical addition necessary for water quality consistency. And lastly, obviously, it serves future supplies, interconnectivity into DeSoto, as well as Charlotte County. So the three documents, the interlocal agreement here, basically there's some terms and conditions. The key components really are it identifies the facilities that are to be acquired. The purchase price states that it's contingent upon receiving those funds from the Water Management District. Requires the development of that operational protocol. And it has two dates in there. We've got a December 31st of 2021 where the acquisition needs to be completed by, and then the termination of the interlocal agreement by December 31st of 2022. The purchase and sale agreement, again, we've seen these in our own home purchases before. It identifies the facilities that will be acquired, again, the sale price, and has some definitions for the inspection period, title, closing, warranty, and representation requirements. The operational protocol document outlines not only normal, but also emergency or temporary operating conditions. It outlines DeSoto County's operational responsibilities as well as the authorities. It identifies a responsible party for regulatory agency coordination and establishes an operations coordination committee. And then finally, it defines the budgeting and invoicing processes. So I leave you, if you have any questions, the four motions are on the board, and Mr. Chair, you can choose to do it as one motion or separately. It's at your pleasure, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, first of all, any questions for Terry?
Members, Jessica Benson from the authority. We selected Evergreen Solution to conduct the compensation and classification study for us. And here, Angel Yasek, she's the senior consultant for Evergreen, and she's here to present the findings and recommendations.
All right, thank you board for your time this morning. I will go ahead and go through the presentation, and I ask that all questions be held until the very end. So to go through the agenda for today, I'm going to give an overview of the study process, as well as go through our findings from employee outreach, our assessment of current conditions of the authority's current compensation system, review of the authority's compensation philosophy, as well as a classification review, a compensation review, which includes our market analysis. I will also show the new pay plan, as well as the implementation method and cost for implementing that new pay plan. In terms of completed tasks, we have conducted department head interviews and employee focus groups via Zoom. In the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were still able to reach everyone, but we did that through Zoom. We also assessed the conditions of the current pay system, reviewed the authority's compensation philosophy, conducted an internal equity analysis through something that we call a job assessment tool, or JAT. This was where we asked all employees to give us feedback on what they do in their position, their duties, responsibilities. We also asked supervisors to provide additional feedback on that to make sure that we covered all aspects of what employees do in their jobs. We also conducted an external equity analysis by surveying the market to determine what our market competitive salary ranges for each position. Based on all those results, we revised the authority's pay plan to be competitive, not just at the market average, but at a lead market position of 60th percentile, so that's ahead of the market. We also individually assigned classifications to a pay grade or pay range within that pay plan, developed optional methods for implementation, estimated the annualized salary costs, and we have prepared and provided draft and final reports. All we have left is to provide a training and methodology to human resources so they can maintain the pay plan between now and the next compensation study. And we are also in the process of preparing those revised job descriptions, which will be provided in whole later on. So this slide summarizes the general feedback that we obtained from the department heads as well as the employees. Overall, employees found their jobs to be very rewarding. They love serving the community, and they enjoy giving back to the community through their jobs at the authority. And additionally, the authority offers an excellent benefits package. Everyone has glowing remarks to say about it. However, there were some concerns that methods for pay progression were not very clear. And additionally, there was some concern that there was not enough opportunity for career advancement within each job family. So next we did an overview of the type of pay plan that the authority administered. There was one open range pay plan, meaning that there is an established minimum, midpoint, and maximum with range spreads of 55%. So that means that there's growth between the minimum and the maximum of 50%. And then we also assessed where were employee salaries within each of those pay ranges. So when we did that assessment, we did a quartile distribution analysis, and we found that overall employee salaries have a pretty good distribution. We see quite a few salaries in the second quartile, third quartile, and fourth quartile, which indicates that distribution is pretty decent. But of course, the question of market competitiveness is something we still had to assess in that market survey. Next, we reviewed the authority's compensation philosophy. So where would the authority like to be moving forward? It was expressed to us that the authority would not only like to be competitive with the market, but also lead at the 60th percentile. So we bore that in mind as we were developing our recommendations. The authority also expressed that they would like to have equitable and flexible pay practices, which is certainly very easy to do with the open range pay plan. They express that's the type of system they would like to continue to have for pay administration. And also in terms of increasing salaries in the future, that would consist of across-the-board increases as well as merit increases. So for the classification review, we reviewed all the employee input and supervisor review input from those job assessment tools. And we utilized a compensable factor scoring methodology to determine the internal hierarchy of those positions. And we also made recommendations for any revisions of those classification titles, expanded various job families to give more room for career growth within a particular job family. Concurrently with that, we conducted a salary survey with the peers. Marked in red were the ones that were included in the analysis. And so we obtained the data for 47 benchmarked classifications, and the average number of matches was 8.0. While it would be nice that every single organization had an exact match with what the authority had, sometimes various organizations don't have the exact same position, so that's why we have an average number of matches of 8.0. But otherwise, it was a very robust sample that we were able to obtain from the peers. Now, in terms of our market findings, we found that when we were looking at that 60th percentile of the market, so a more lead position, the authority was lagging behind the market by 5% at the minimum, 4.3% at the midpoint, and 3.8% at the maximum, suggesting that there is room for opportunity for revising the pay plan to be more market competitive. So in terms of the proposed pay plan, we suggest that we retain that open range structure, retaining the same number of pay grades, those range spreads of 55%, that's all very robust against the market. However, we did adjust those ranges by 5% to catch up with that lag at the market minimum. And then we went through and individually slotted those classifications within those pay ranges. So up here you see the proposed pay plan, which again has a very similar structure to what the authority has currently, but increases those ranges by 5% to be competitive with that lead market position. And then in terms of implementation method, this was the one that we suggest to the authority, and this one is called range new minimum. So as we are shifting the pay plan by 5%, as well as proposing some new pay ranges for various classifications, some employee salaries may fall below those new minimums, which would be a problem. So under this method, we would propose that we bring those employee salaries up to those new minimums, so that way they are in compliance with that new pay plan. So this adjustment would impact 6 employees with a total cost of about $10,000. That concludes my presentation. At this point, I'd be happy to take any questions and also go back over any previous slides as needed.
Any questions? None. Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, with that, we're on item number 3, and we're gonna need a motion. Who would like to do it? Commissioner Cruz.
I'll make a motion to accept the pay and classification study and implement the authority to pay plan revisions as recommended.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Cruz, seconded by Commissioner Langford. Any discussion, fellas? Hearing none, we have a motion to approve. All those in favor for item number 3 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Chair votes aye. Item 3 moves forward 4-0 with approval. We now move to item number 4, legislative priorities for fiscal year 2022. I think both Mike Coates and Laura Donaldson are going to help us with this, and it will take a motion when they're done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Laura's not here, but Doug is going to take Laura's spot. What I'm going to walk through with the board is a couple of the projects that actually the projects we're proposing to submit for state funding this year. And project locations, we've got a project.
It's the pen.
You have to use the pen.
Oh, you use a pen. Okay. We got a project up here, the Phase 3C pipeline, and we have 2 projects at the Peace River facility that we will be setting. One of which has already been submitted. We'll get to that. The first project is the Phase 3C pipeline, and that is this project up here. We are fast tracking this project at the request of Sarasota County. It's a $57 million project. Includes 10 miles of 42 to 48 inch pipeline that will extend up from our current, the terminus, our current pipeline at Clark Road will extend up to Fruitville Road. We're also putting in a pump station up in the Fruitville, Lorraine Road area. And we are going to request from the state $3 million for that. The Water Management District is going to be co-funding that as well.
I think that's hard water. Somebody
Chris gave water.
That usually happens while I'm talking.
It's a plot. This is the fact sheet for it. We've filled out the applications and we're receiving legislative support for it. We talked to the Sarasota delegation meeting yesterday. We've got the Charlotte delegation meeting, DeSoto and Manatees to come. So we'll be presenting this project at those meetings. Second project is the Peace River Reservoir Number 3 wetland mitigation project. And of course, this is these are the footprints that we're looking at for Reservoir Number 3 on the R.V. Griffin property. There will be impacts to wetlands on the property, depending on where we site this. And we're looking at potentially about $20 million worth of wetland mitigation required either by purchasing mitigation credits or by developing mitigation work on other properties. And so we're requesting $2 million from the state to go toward that. Now, mitigation is not covered by SwiftBud, so this $2 million would be a huge benefit to us on that. The rest of it would have to be covered by whoever participates in the reservoir. Again, that project will be submitted to the state legislature for co-funding as well. Then the third project we have is an infrastructure resiliency project. These projects were required to be submitted by August 30th of this year, so we did submit for that. And it really is for the Peace River Reservoir preliminary engineering that we're going into in fiscal 2022. And we requested $2 million of those resiliency funds to go toward that engineering, preliminary engineering study. The preliminary engineering study is about $7.25 million in total. And so it would be a fairly good sized chunk of that. But these were funds that were available kind of on a fast burn with the August 30th requirement to submit a co-funding or a grant funding agreement, and so we went ahead and submitted for that. So those are the projects that we've got in our legislative agenda, and if you have any questions on those, I'd be glad to answer. If you can support those projects in your legislative agendas, that would be a great help to the authority as well.
Okay, questions for Mr. Coates? I don't see any, Mike. So let's just a motion. We're on item number 4.
No motion for this, it's just information.
No, just information.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
You don't have to accept it. The agenda says there's a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I-
It says adopt legislative priorities.
Oh,
And once this board does, then we can take it back to our boards for
Right.
additional honors.
So
It's not my mistake, you're right.
I didn't hear you. What did you say?
So repeat that for my wife.
For 7 years, I've never had you never made one mistake, so that's a great record. All right, we need a motion on item number 4.
Move approval of legislative priorities for 2022.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Truitt, seconded by Commissioner Langford. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Chair votes aye. That moves forward 4-0. We're on item number 5, purchase a pump station site for Phase 3C Regional Interconnect. And again, Mike's going to help us with that.
Chair, board members, if you recall, back in June, we brought an interlocal agreement to the board with Sarasota County to purchase a pump station site up in the vicinity of Fruitville and Lorraine Road for the Phase 3C project. And that interlocal agreement was executed, approved by our board. We have found a piece of property up there. It unfortunately now is under contract. We put in a contingent offer for that in case this contract falls through. We would need to get on the property if the contract falls through. We need to get on the property, perform some due diligence work. We need, of course, an appraisal and a survey. All of that takes about 30 days now. But what we're requesting here is the ability for me to go ahead and make an offer on the property if we're able to make an offer on the property, and if the due diligence works out, to make an offer on the property of up to the appraised value plus 5% in this market, and then allow the chair to go ahead and approve any documents to allow us to close on the property. Things are moving ridiculously fast out here. And in fact, there are two backup offers in back of our backup offer on this piece of property. So we don't know if it's going to all come to fruition, but if we do get a chance to purchase it, we're going to need to move quickly, and this request, this motion allows us to do that, move as quickly as a government agency can move, I think. We can't really compete with somebody with a checkbook out there that's just going to buy it off the street. But, we can make an effort. So.
Mr. Coates, before I ask everybody else for a question, I've been involved with you on this. Do you want this motion to include the opportunity for you to begin speaking with on other pieces of property? Should we not retain the second position here?
Yes, we will actually be talking to other folks about property. If we can't buy this piece, we will start negotiations with others out here. Those we hope won't be on quite this quick a burn. This one just happens to be under contract now.
And my point is, all that is included when we approve this motion, if we approve it. Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
Commissioner Langford, Commissioner Truex, then Commissioner Langford.
I have a question in that, understanding the situation out there right now, I'm not sure that the plus 5% is enough, and I think that we can go plus 10% legally for government authority, correct?
Yes, it's completely in your discretion.
So I would like for the board to have that thought. I don't know where we want to go, but to have that thought for flexibility, because if that 5% makes a difference on this piece and it makes the most sense as a location, I wouldn't want to lose it over that 5%.
Okay, that makes very good sense. Commissioner Langford. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just have one more point of information.
Yes,
what survey company can you get in 30 days? Because I need their name.
It's just a rumor that we can get some.
I was going to say.
It sounded better. Question I have, what's the time frame on the contract that's on the property now that we're waiting?
The due diligence time frame on the contract or the property now expires next week.
Okay.
So we will know next week whether their financing has gone through and all of that. So that's when we'll know.
Okay, so it's not 30 days or 45 days, it's like 7?
Well, they actually put the contract on the property about 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, with that said, we'll need a motion.
Do we want to amend?
Yes, sir.
Agree to the 10%?
Yes.
That's a suggestion for me. I think it's only smart to give them the latitude to do that. Particularly since I think this location is very strategic,
Yes.
Very beneficial, potentially for additional costs down the road. So that's why I support giving them the additional flexibility. So if you would, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to make that a motion.
Yes, go right ahead.
I move to authorize the executive director to execute a purchase offer up to the appraised value of the subject property plus 10% as a cost avoidance measure for engineering and acquisition costs on additional properties, and execute all documents necessary for closing subject to document review and approval by the General Counsel.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Truex, seconded by Commissioner Langford. Any discussion? I'll just offer, and I'm picking my words carefully, this, whatever purchase we make is going to be in Sarasota County. And I'll possibly, probably, in all likelihood, get Sarasota County out of your way as you try to move forward here. But that's the best I'm going to offer publicly.
We'll talk.
Yes. With that said, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Chair votes aye. Mike, you got that one approved. That's
Thank you.
fine. Great. All right, now, let me just take us through a little choreography here. Initially, we were going to adjourn this meeting and then reconvene it following the Authority Board Master Water Supply Contract and Transmission System workshop session, but instead of that, when we get done with the General Counsel's report, the Executive Director's report, we're just going to adjourn this meeting and move into the workshop. So why don't we take those two reports, finish this meeting, adjourn, and then go right into the workshop. I think that's you, Mr. Manson.
I have nothing to report.
Okay. I always want to say great, but I don't mean great, but okay, great. Executive Director's report.
Nothing to report.
Great. I mean, thank you. Anything else? The routine status reports? Any board member comments? Okay, with that said, we are adjourned and we're going to move into the workshop. And would the board like, just so everybody can get organized, a quick break? Why don't we do that? Yes. That's great.
What's the Sarasota definition of quick?
2 or 3 years, yeah.
I was going to say, I can give you definition.
To establish these connection fees. But what I wanted to start with on this, just to bring everybody up to speed, is how we pay for pipelines and the concept of hydraulic capacity of pipelines, just as a prelude to what Andy is going to do. So our master water supply contract has the requirements for paying for new regional pipelines, and it is user pay. Whoever wants a pipeline, we can build the pipeline, but you have to pay for the pipeline. And so that's how it's established. And we do that through interlocal agreements between the authority and the participating customer. We have, for example, an interlocal agreement with Sarasota County to do the Phase 3B pipeline most recently. And those interlocal agreements have costs, timeframes, responsibilities, if the local government has to give us any easements or that sort of thing. But really just kind of all the rules of the game for developing a new pipeline. The authority builds the pipeline. We contract for the engineering on it, for the design, the permitting, the construction, and when the project is finished, we own the pipeline, and we take care of that as part of our work on our facilities. Hydraulic capacity in the pipeline is allocated based on how much a customer paid to get in, their capital component to get into that. For example, in the Phase 3B pipeline, Sarasota County ended up paying about $6.5 million toward that pipeline. The Water Management District paid about $6.5 million. So it's about a 50-50 split, and we'll get into that. And the grant funding that we get for the pipelines goes to purchase authority hydraulic capacity. So typically, in all of our new regional pipelines and the existing pipelines, the authority will have 50% of the capacity in those pipelines, a little more, a little less, just depending on what got paid where. But that's one of the things that Andy's going to be talking about. So let's just give an example here of the Phase 3B interconnect. I talked about that just a minute ago. This is a 5-mile pipeline that extended from the end of our transmission main near Knights Trail Road and the landfill on Sarasota County, and it extended up to Clark Road. We signed an interlocal agreement with Sarasota County in 2016 on this. The budgeted cost for the project was $16.7 million just for the pipeline, and no pump stations involved. The final cost of that was $13.9 million, so it came in under budget, on time. Sarasota County ended up paying $6.74 million of that $13.9. SwiftMud, $6.6 million, and then we got about $500,000 from the state. And so from a hydraulic capacity standpoint, you see this is a 48-inch line. Sarasota County's got about 48% of that pipeline hydraulic capacity. We've got about 52%. Now, hydraulic capacity is kind of a fuzzy number. We say it's fluid, and it is fluid. A 48-inch pipeline, if we said common engineering is 5 feet per second is a reasonable flow through that pipeline. So water moving 5 feet per second. That's about 41 million gallons a day through a 48-inch pipeline. So in this case, Sarasota County would have about 20 million gallons of capacity, and the authority would have about 21 million gallons a day of capacity. This is the piece of the pie that Andy is going to be talking to you about, is if we have someone come in and they want to hook up to a regional pipeline and they haven't contributed any capital money toward that pipeline, they haven't bought in originally, like Sarasota County did on this, they would have to get part of the authority's capacity in that line. And so that's what Andy's going to be talking with you about, is the charge to hook up to that authority capacity. Now, if Sarasota County wanted another connection on this pipeline, there's no charge other than the charge to install that connection. We would just charge them for whatever it cost us to go in and put the meter in. It's this piece here, this regional capacity that we're going to be talking about. So with that, is there any question about how we pay for these pipelines and a hydraulic capacity issue? Okay. All right. With that, Andy Burnham of Stantec is going to get up and talk to you about their methodology.
Thanks, Mike. Chairman, board members, Andy Burnham with Stantec. Good to see you all again this morning. So I've got a brief presentation to go over how we've come up with a way to establish a cost for that capacity in instances when a new connection requires the ability to purchase some of the authority's hydraulic capacity in those different pipelines. So I've just got a few slides here. It's about 10 in total, so I'm not really going to belabor the agenda. I think Mike's done a good job of really setting up the issue and the discussion that we're wanting to have in terms of how do we deal with situations that are coming in terms of new connections to the regional transmission system that will be occurring over time. That could be by certain customers that don't have capacity in those lines, or additional entities connecting to the regional pipelines that may be in your respective agency's service boundaries. So say, for instance, the city of Venice wanted to connect to a regional pipeline. How do we deal with the cost of capacity needed to serve them if it goes beyond what, say, Sarasota County already has in a pipeline? That's really the intent of what we're trying to address today. And in so doing, we want to understand what should that cost be, what should we use those funds for in the event we do have those connections and purchases of the authority's capacity, and to make sure we've got a full grasp of how these things could be updated over time. We've used a methodology today to establish an estimated unit cost of that capacity, but that's something that's going to change over time as the infrastructure changes, as more pipeline segments are built, or we complete all the segments. We may have to give thought to how we would update this type of a fee mechanism to account for changes in the investment in the pipeline system over time. So this has been a complex conversation that's been about 3 years in the making. So we've had conversations in the past that have explored the cost consequences of different connections coming into the system, whether it's customers of the authority connecting to different pipelines that haven't already connected, or if it's, as I mentioned, other agencies, non-customers, if you will, that want to connect to the system. And what types of costs should we try to capture? Would it be pipeline usage fees? Would it be maintenance costs of the pipelines? Would it be capital costs? We're really focused here through the discussions that we've had over the past couple of years on the capital cost side. What should the cost be to buy or purchase that hydraulic share of capacity, as Mike mentioned, in those instances when those new connections are required that go beyond what your individual as customers have contributed to purchase capacity in those pipelines. And so that's where we worked through today. So we've had various meetings with yourselves at a concept level, with professional staff, to work through these concepts and to make sure that we're thinking about as many of the possible perspectives or implications of this type of a fee mechanism as part of bringing this to you today. So as we talked about, this would be really a one-time fee that would be applicable in those instances when we have a connection to the system where hydraulic capacity is required. So the example that Mike went through is a great one, where let's say a new member wanted to connect to a pipeline that didn't have capacity in that pipeline. They would need to purchase some of the authority's capacity. Or if there's a new connection happening to a pipeline that's outside of one of your own respective governments, how do we handle that in terms of a capacity allocation to buy some of the authority's capacity in those pipelines to provide that service? And so that's really what we're looking at today, and the benefits of this would be to recognize that there is a cost and there is a value of carrying that capacity in the pipelines that would be necessary to serve these new connections. And in so doing, that would generate revenues that could be used for a number of purposes: future pipeline projects, common benefit projects, even to offset future pipeline payments by customers for maybe non-member connections in your respective areas. So all of this would have ultimately a benefit that would flow back to the cost for each one of your respective governments through these types of connection charges. So what we did in this approach, and this is a very common concept that's applied throughout the industry. In fact, you're probably very familiar with it for your own utility systems in terms of capacity fees that are often called impact fees, system development charges, capital charges. They really go by many names, but they're really intended to represent that cost of buying into the system to capture that unit cost of capacity. And so there's really three by-the-book approaches that you could utilize to try to establish that unit cost. Given the current trends in cost information, what we've chosen to work with is using the current capital improvement projects for regional transmission system segments in your CIP as the cost basis for the fee. So we identified the costs, deducted the estimated grants that would be received from those costs to determine what's the net cost to the authority for these pipelines that we're talking about. And for these particular four segments that were in the capital plan, it's about $118 million. And then, similar to what Mike described, we then worked with staff to identify, based upon those flow rates of 5 feet per second and the diameter of the pipes, what are those capacities of those pipeline segments that are being built in terms of million gallons a day of capacity, so that we would basically be able to have a denominator. So our numerator would be 118 million, the denominator would be 72 million gallons of capacity that those pipeline investments would provide. Oftentimes these types of fees are converted and expressed in a fee per equivalent residential unit. So we also took that capacity and expressed it as a number of equivalent residential units that can be served. That's how many of your respective capacity fees work today, is you charge them per equivalent residential unit. So we wanted to be able to convert this fee that we calculate that would be applied per million gallons of reserve capacity to a fee per equivalent unit. So you'd have a basis to compare it, some context to evaluate it against your own fees that you have for impact fees for new customers that happen within each of your respective service areas within the counties. So when we take the 118 million and divide it by the equivalent residential units, converting that 72 million gallons of capacity into equivalent residential units, it's about $409 per ERC, or per equivalent residential unit. On a cost per million gallon basis, it's about $1.6 million per million gallons. So if there were a new customer that would be connecting to a system that needed 7.5 million gallons of pipeline capacity to purchase that from the authority, we would take that fee per million gallons times 7.5, and that means there would be a capacity fee necessary of $12.6 million to acquire that hydraulic capacity in that pipeline as part of receiving service. So as I mentioned, a number of agencies throughout the country and also locally provide these types of capital cost recovery mechanisms to buy and purchase system capacity that are necessary to provide service. So we grabbed a couple of different agencies that are more regional in nature outside of Florida that, while they're wastewater focused, they have similar capacity fees. In some cases, we've seen these done where they actually apply them directly to new construction units that happen in the individual municipal agencies that are served by the regional authority. That's very administratively burdensome and would be a pretty big challenge to monitor. In this instance, given that there's a policy already that any non-members that want to connect to the system would do so through each of the respective governments here, that's not really a place that we need to go. We can keep this more high level and simplistic and have it roll through really each of the respective members of the authority. We've also identified just for each of the members and customer of the authority, just what the current fee is for water capacity cost per equivalent residential unit. And you can see that those range anywhere from about $1,700 in Manatee County up to about $2,950 in Sarasota County. And different methods are used, whether it's looking at your existing assets, future assets, or a combination of the two. All of those are appropriate cost bases to establish what these fees should be to capture those capacity costs. And the method you use may change over time. And that's something that I want to reiterate, is that as the authority moves forward with this concept, you may in the future want to look at establishing a different method to calculate these costs. So what we've done today is, with the information available, given a recommendation that we think makes sense to get this started, you'll want to update this over time. And it may trend and shift to existing assets. As you complete the regional transmission system, you may not have as much forward-looking investment, so you may need to look backwards to calculate your cost of capacity for this type of a fee. So the next steps, in terms of moving this forward, there would be some policy work needed to kind of write up some of the assumptions about how the fee would be applied, updated periodically, what the funds would be used for. But ultimately, this could be something that would be incorporated during the annual budget process, just like you update your normal fixed fees and variable rates. This could be incorporated into that process each year, so you have annual updates to this fee if it's something that the board wants to move forward with. But given the rate of connectivity or interest in connectivity to the regional transmission system, getting something like this in place sooner rather than later, I think is pretty important, as those new connections to the pipelines are coming, and they're the types of connections that are outside of existing capacity purchases that the respective members have made. So I'll pause there and see if, Mike, if there's anything else that you want to add to that, or if we want to maybe just enter into some discussion.
Well, Mike, you go first, but I've got a couple of questions.
No, I don't.
And then anyone else? Do you have one else?
I just, on the illustration that Mike showed us earlier, the pipeline was, say, run through Sarasota 48%, Sarasota 52%, the authority. What triggers or determines if someone wants to buy in capacity or buy into that water line? Who gets what? I mean, what triggers? Whether if I'm a developer, then I'll come in and say, hey, I want to put in 1,000 units here, and I need to buy capacity. Do I buy it from the authority, or do I buy it from Sarasota? What determines that?
So I'll start, and Mike, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but for a new development that happens within, say, DeSoto County, they're still going to connect to your utility system, not necessarily directly to the regional authority's pipeline. So this would be more like a city of Venice or a Punta Gorda, or those types of larger agencies directly interconnecting, maybe for emergency service or reliability. But all of those connections to the pipeline, they would be managed through your utility system, is what's really the policy as I understand it. So they would have to work through your capacity. And to the extent that you didn't have enough available, that's when this would come into play. Or if you didn't have capacity in a pipeline that was needed to provide the
So
supply.
if we didn't have enough capacity, if we was at 48% and we needed more than that, then we would wind up purchasing the rest of it from the authority.
The additional that you would need above
Okay.
that. Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay, I just have, again, that was a great lead-in for me. In Mike's example, Sarasota County, and I'm already in some trouble, I bet, with Sarasota County for my earlier smart alecky remarks, so I'm going to tread carefully here. Sarasota County, in that example, paid almost half the costs. So Mike said if Sarasota County needed another connection, it would just be the cost of the interconnect. question number one, what if Sarasota County needed more of that capacity out of that pipeline? And they're in effect taking from the authority's capacity in there. What would Sarasota County pay in that instance?
So that would be very consistent, I think, to the example we just talked about, where any increment above the existing capacity that you've paid or contributed into that line, there would be a fee for that component of additional capacity needed.
Okay, and this board has always been very proud of how little we raise rates. The last rate was almost de minimis, am I right? It was like 12 cents a month per residential user. So a different jurisdiction, not a member jurisdiction, I'll just leave it at that so I don't get further in trouble. Not a member jurisdiction wants to connect. Right now, before we make any changes, if we voted to allow them to connect, how would they be charged?
So right now, as I understand it, for that connection, there would be cost of making it, but that connection to the regional system would hopefully be coordinated through using your utility as an example, or Sarasota County, that through Sarasota County's utility. And so there's not a charge for pipeline capacity at this point for that member. So if they wanted to connect to the regional system, they would coordinate that through, obviously, Sarasota County. But right now, there's not a fee mechanism to charge them for that capital cost if it were to require additional regional transmission system capacity above what the county has today. So that's kind of the key threshold in that instance is right now today we don't have a mechanism to charge for that additional capacity cost unless Sarasota County was able to negotiate something on behalf of the authority or the authority was directly with the customer, or the non-member customer. But my understanding is the board's policy direction has been that all of those types of non-member connections should be coordinated through the host county. And even in that context, we still don't have a capacity charge that would be levied for that non-member government at this time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the whole intent of this was really to try to address that situation.
And again, speaking in this just made up example, on one hand, we want to be a regional utility. I get that. On the other hand, it should be coordinated through the county that the other jurisdiction, the other non-member jurisdiction operates in. But it just seems, and I don't want to be too protective of Peace River here, but it just seems that they're getting the capacity. We, Peace River, can't charge end users. We're just a bulk purveyor. And they're getting the benefit of all the other expenses that we've had, and wherein do things like the overhead, the maintenance, the repairs, the interest rate on the bonds. Is that what the next section of this is about?
So that would be a subsequent conversation. So we'd had previously talked about trying to capture some of those maintenance costs, other infrastructure costs as part of, say, a pipeline usage fee for those non-member customers, or a renewal and replacement type based fee, almost a standby fee for some of those maintenance related activities. However, this was the first step in the conversation, was capturing the capacity cost. And then, once we've tackled this kind of very important initial conversation, then I think those were things that we want to come back to, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, relative to looking at how do we then, for non-member governments, assign and allocate some of those related costs for standby service or usage of the regional transmission network. So those are.
And I apologize if I got ahead of you. I just
That's
need to absorb this in smaller bites. So that's the reason for the many questions.
No, that's fantastic. It is a bit complicated, and so those other costs that you mentioned would be part of I think a next step or a subsequent conversation. So we're focused on this on initially.
That's another conversation, not the second half of your conversation today.
No, sir.
Oh dear. Okay. Okay. Anyway, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. This is it's straightforward, makes sense what you're trying to show, but you're basing it on one pipe. But obviously, this is an interconnected system. There's a lot going downstream, no pun intended. So say Sarasota, because that was an example, builds this one pipe here and they get 48% of the capacity, but clearly the water flow and the capacity, it is interconnected to other pipes potentially built by other counties at other times. For instance, like say, hypothetically speaking, Manatee County says, okay, we're going to build this next segment here to get it to us. pay a certain amount of money, therefore we get a certain percentage of capacity. How is the interconnected fee factored into the previous pipes and infrastructure that was already in place prior to us doing that? Or could we just build 10 feet of pipe and take 48% capacity and everyone else is responsible for getting that water to us? Like, how is that accounted for? Because obviously we're expanding this and growing this, but it seems like we're focused on the next step, not the last step, and there's capacity issues eventually downstream as well.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of probable answers to that, and I think Michael will have a couple things to say. But the one thing I wanted to offer is just when we look at the cost basis of the fee, right now we're looking at those few forward-looking projects, but as I mentioned for updates, we may want to pull more projects into this to get that more robust unit cost calculation. So as we get more completion on the regional transmission system to come up with that all-in unit cost for transmission that would be reflective of not just the new assets, but also the old assets. Right now, we're trying to get this started with an initial fee calculation concept with what's in front of us, but I think you're right that we will need to consider pulling in at some point those existing regional transmission assets as they become one larger system.
Yeah, because we go up to 3, but what if, again, somebody else says, you know, we're going to build 4, and we're just going to have it. So does that tie into one of these here, and then that's how the capacity is factored in? Is at some point that pipe 4 or pipe 3B or 3A has to tie into 2 or wherever? So, you know, if Sarasota's paying half of that, does that mean they're not paying for the tie-in and the capacity being used on 2 or 1 or previous pipes?
I see. Mike, I'll let you.
Let me jump in because you're doing great. You're asking great questions about the next part where I'm going to be talking about pipeline. So you jumped ahead, which I love. So the pipeline issue is a more difficult issue. What we're looking at is an evolution. You know, when we initially got, and I'll discuss it in my section, when we initially did the 2005 contract, we were a water supplier to, 4 customers at the time. And so the idea was that's the mentality. And then as we've evolved with the boards, we've become more of a philosophy of let's be an interconnected utility system. So the idea would be, previously we were thinking if you wanted to buy water from the authority, you would have to become a member or a customer. And if you weren't a customer in the master water supply contract, well then all 5 governments would have to approve it. We've evolved from that philosophy to a philosophy of let's tie in with as many as your current policy is. Let's get all these governments in this region to tie into the system. So in part, the contract doesn't have the ability to bend to these kinds of concepts on what's the overall cost of pipeline. So part of what we're doing here is just like a baby step or a crawl before we stand up and walk, before we stand up and run. And one of the things we're going to talk about in the pipeline concept is what do we do next? Because there is some inherent unfairness, if you will, that we assumed when we built these pipelines, because this was the model, water flowed one way, right? I mean, Sarasota pays and we pipe water to Sarasota. But the fact of the matter is, when the hurricane comes, Sarasota pumped water to Charlotte, the opposite direction of that pipeline. And as it becomes interconnected, as Mike and I and Andy have all discussed, it's going to be harder and harder to figure out what part of the pipeline should you pay for. In fact, that concept is really not going to work at some point in the future. Right? It works now, maybe it hobbles a little bit. And what we're trying to do is okay, well, here's a baby step toward it, but it doesn't take into account, like you're saying, well, what if, the pipeline that brought the water all the way up to the connection at Manatee or whatever. And it's not so much for Manatee, but think of the next person that comes in. Imagine a new city, so we'll call it new city, hooks in, and wants to hook in your pipeline. It's in your county, and if you want to hook in, you're like, well, yeah, but we need all the capacity we have. Well, so what's going to happen is we're going to go ahead and let you all hook onto that pipeline, but you're going to have to pay through Manatee County, pay the authority this connection fee, and potentially in the future some other fee for the capacity to utilize that water, and even maybe a portion of the source. They're still your customer. We're just like we right now. We bill you for water and you pass it on to your customers that way. It'll be the same type of thing, although it'll be connection fee, and there may be some other fees. But the first thing we were starting with is, well, how do you do that? But legally, we'll have to, amend contract documents and do all that. So we were looking at how do we at least start down that road? And that's what this concept is. We start down the road for these new connections coming in. How do we start adding them? Because right now we don't have a method for somebody to say, like an Inglewood or Bradenton to hook up to a pipeline where you're saying, I need all my capacity to get to Canada. I've got my 48%, I need it all. But there's 52%. You want to strike a deal and pay for that authority cost, pass through us, you can do that. But you're going to have to go to the authority and make that arrangement, and then, we'll deliver the water to you. So I like the concept, but you immediately picked up on the fact that it doesn't get us all the way there. That's just a start.
Any other questions?
Just a comment.
Yeah, go right ahead.
The name of that new city in Charlotte County is Babcock Ranch. And I had a conversation with them on Wednesday about you guys need to start thinking for the future because they have their own water plant and they're sole source and they have no backup. And so I planted that seed, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's probably not going to happen in 5 years, but it is going to happen at some future date.
And it won't be the only one.
No, absolutely.
And I was getting nervous because I thought we were going to solve everything in the next 30 minutes, but apparently there's many more steps. So that. Just one last question.
Plenty of job security, sir.
One last, yes, I used to do that for a living, yes. One more question on the example with Sarasota County. I like that example. So Sarasota County, whatever, it's got dibs on 48% of the volume going through that pipe. So all of a sudden, and the authority has the rest. Sarasota wants more, just isolate it to that one pipe. Does Sarasota County then buy it from Peace? And if so, right now, with the way things are set up, what's the charge?
The charge right now is there's no definition of the charge. What Andy has proposed is that if you wanted to buy another 1 MPD of capacity, what he's proposed is it would be 1.9.
1.6.
That's what that number is. I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Plus the bulk fee.
Plus, if you want a connection,
Right.
yeah, to the, so to install that connection, that would be whatever it costs us to install.
And then the actual cost would be after the initial connection fee, whatever that would be, then any of that 52% capacity that they want to buy, they pay the bulk rate just like.
Yeah, whatever their water rate is,
Okay.
base rate, use rate,
I understand it completely now, I think.
Very good, then we should stop here. So that's all I have.
Okay. Mike, what's the next step? Or Doug? Oh, just Doug is the.
I think that the next step on this concept is where would you like to go with this? Would you like to have us take this to the professional staff and administrators and kind of work through some of these examples and come back with something? What would you like to do with it?
I think that you're going to have to go back with each county's utilities director and staff, and fiscal and everybody, to sit down and talk about what the implications are here, what's good about it, what's potentially bad about it. But I agree is that as we move forward, these are steps, but eventually this isn't going to work, because as this thing starts to loop together, then we're going to start looking at it a little bit differently because of the backfeeding that we're going to be doing. So what does that look like? And I really think we need to have those conversations now to see what the future might, and I get how it can change, but I think we need to create the day based upon what the future could look like. Keep some of those things in mind and move forward, but definitely go back a step.
I would agree with that, and I have to tell you, and this, I like to think it's possible. What Commissioner Truex just said, I agree with completely, but I'd like to get to a point in the future, whether it's in a year or 5, 6, 7 years, where it's pretty seamless and non-confrontational. Everybody understands it. The 4 county utilities understand it. Everybody bought in, and it's seamless and no hard feelings, and there's no confrontations over it. So that's a big job. I know.
Big job for you, all of you. All I have to do is write up what you want. You have to be the one to decide what you want. It's a tough job.
And just to make sure I'm on, just to finish that, with potential conflict, this is intentionally structured where the authority effectively keeps half of this capacity, right? There's no, this isn't just pro rata based on what a county wants to do. It's intentionally structured that approximately 50% capacity is retained by the authority.
Well, I think that's specific to the pipelines.
Well, I'm just saying, because you're talking 1.6 million per million gallons, correct?
Yeah, per MTB.
Well, I mean, it looked like to me that pipeline was substantially cheaper to build. So in theory, couldn't Sarasota game the system, build the entire pipeline with no authority money, and then collect 1.6 million off of somebody else down the road, profit off of it, have control over the full capacity?
Well, so from a connection policy standpoint, I'll defer to Doug about that, but the intent here is that so long as the cost of that pipeline, whether it's done by the authority or the county specifically, that if it's for non-member customers in particular, or that member themselves, that they're paying for that cost. So I don't know if it's really quote gaming the system, it's more about just making sure we're allocating the cost of that capacity to those who need it.
Oh, no, I get what you're saying. What I'm saying is the authority has the ability to, it's retaining some level of held back capacity for the Braytons, the England, the Babcock branches. But if you allow everyone effectively to go through the authority and build and take 100% of capacity, then they control it. You start getting back into the system of, well, I'll charge you $2 million for a million gallons. If you want me to give up some of my capacity, you start getting back into that.
Correct.
That water war kind of situation.
Correct. And then you may have insufficient capacity to address the policy that Doug just espoused.
That's why I was asking, was that intentionally structured, was that coincidence, or was that intentionally structured where the authority intends going forward to go 50-50 and keep 50% of the capacity, so the authority has control over properly divvying it up to make sure people aren't gaming systems and overcharging neighbors?
I think that's, kind of I would say an ideal behind this, consistent with the policy objectives that really started this process. So I think that intent is to keep a regional perspective on the pipeline capacity.
It's partly SWIFT's policy. So SWIFT's is the money that they grant to the authority to pay for half of these pipelines is saying that capacity must be held in the regional
okay.
perspective.
No, I agree with that. I just want to make sure that was the case. It wasn't a coincidence of it.
Yeah, no, very good. Yeah.
Good, okay. Doug. And we have 10 times more questions for you, Doug, than we did for this stuff.
Is it by the hour or by the question?
They're about the same.
Questions are limited to the topic in front of you, though.
That's good.
So, what I was going to do was run through the changes that you kind of jumped ahead, which is fantastic, Mr. Cruz, because that's where we were going with some of these concept changes. We don't have answers yet on exactly what it's going to look like, but we want to test the water or your temperature for the will to go forward to have these discussions with professional staff. So the first thing we did, which I'll say, is this would be a tepid bath that no one's going to love, but no one's going to hate. And this is an update of the contract. So 16 years ago, we came up with the 2005 contract, and the climate was one of high distrust among the members and to the authority and one another. So we managed to work for over a year to put together a unified approach to go forward. And the contract, and I'm going to be saying things about the contract and things that are wrong with it. At the time, that was the best contract that could be constructed, and I was involved in it, and all the board members from all the counties and Northport were involved as well. So we have a contract that involves 5 customers and 4 members, and that's the master water supply contract. And we also redid our governance document as well. And I'm not going to talk about that today. So what I did at the instruction of staff, and it's not just me, I mean, we were in a room full. Terry was there, Mike's there, Pat was there, we had Richard in there. We went through the contract in several meetings, what's outdated. And if we just turn to like 1.14, section 1.14. So you're looking and seeing a lot of these different definitions are going to be changed. And part of that is because, well, as happened earlier in the meeting, occasionally, even with all that many eyes looking at the contract, there's mistakes. And we were interchangeably talking about one title, because as you're negotiating the document, there's a definition. And then, so the whole document's written with one set of words. And then at the end, a definition gets changed. And you try to go back and
make sure you change all the wording, like the title of something, like authority water supply source. Now, there wasn't that. It was all water supplies talked about together. Anyway, that's one of the changes we made, just like a correction to the contract. Now, if we go to let's go to section 4. Now, this is what I'm calling is just the update of the contract, no new concepts. This is the condition preceding. All of this entire section is now outdated. These were all things that had to happen before the initial contract went into supply. So what we're suggesting is let's delete all of that out. It's no longer necessary or even applicable to the contract. And the same thing with section 5 on the following page. This was contemplating funding from, and which we did receive, EPA for the REP, which is already done and complete. And so you see that when we get through this, there's lots of changes that have been made in the contract based on things that have just happened. Go to 1.28. I'm sorry, I'm taking it backwards.
It's okay. We're good sport.
All right, so the 1991 facility debt service has been paid off. So there's no reason to have that distinction placed in the contract anymore. That's done, so we need to fix it because we don't, some of the provisions don't make sense. Another area I changed, or I proposed to change, is just simply, we talk about the permitted amount at 12, it's 15 now. And actually it's now up even higher with our 50-year permits. So we have to go back and change some of those numbers in some of the sections. We have like bond refunding in there for bonds that have been paid off already. Go to rate setting at 16.1. So again, this was written back when we still had the REP debt, we still had the PRO debt, and the 1991 debt. So 1991 has been paid off, PRO will be paid off in 2028. Remember, it's been 16 years. I don't think that we'll be wanting to revise this contract in the next 4 to 5 years, or even 6 or 7, probably another decade or more. So the idea is looking into the future and saying, okay, let's go ahead and anticipate that. We're not changing anything, but we're going to say, okay, until 2028, now that we know when that debt service will be paid off, and the 1991 is already paid off, and then updating this provision. This is like a substantive update. We're having to make changes in the rate setting to reflect what's already happened, different than what it was when we put it together. Those are the kinds of changes that are out there. We circulated this. I believe this was like, I'll end on section 18. We circulated this among the professional staff at the meeting in September, this version of the contract, and it's now been distributed out to, in the board book and to legal staff. What I'm proposing is that we have a discussion, a professional staff's discussion to go over the contract terms. That's going to involve mostly the lawyers and whoever's interested from the staffs as well, kind of talk about the update. And those are the kinds of changes were made. I don't think any of them will be particularly objectionable because they're non-substantive, they're just updating. They may have some small effects on the contract provisions and how they apply, and that's why the lawyers need to look at it, but there's nothing new concept type of thing involved in these changes that we put out. Now the next set of changes that we're talking about, and I may make you go around to these sections to look at, are we have a number of things in the contract that just don't, it's been 16 years, some things don't work real well in the contract. And one of the things that doesn't work well legally is our new water allocation process. And at the time, we had anticipated that someone would be able to come in, make a request. We would then change the chart on the contract just like as an addendum, and not go back and have contract reviewed and approved. To make sure that's legally binding, which like questionable whether it is, and that's been questioned during our time frame of the 16 years, I think we need to look at a new concept. And I think a new concept would be that we put all the existing allocations in the contract under I think it's section 22.1 and then 22.2. But then we have independent contracts. So in other words, if Manatee wants to come in and buy 3 million gallons, we don't have to go and amend the entire contract and have the authority to go and negotiate, and I am a member, with all other members and customers to buy more water. You know, we want to encourage people as an authority to buy more water. When you buy more water, you're also buying the new source to be derived. You know, we have a new reservoir out there, we have new water coming online. So the idea to make the concept more legally binding, and it would also be administratively and politically more easier to do, would be to have a separate form contract. Nothing complicated, it's just have to have a written agreement that someone's committing to, hey, I want 5 MGD by this time frame, and then they're committing to pay for that 5 MGD in that time frame. And then instead of having to amend the entire master water supply contract with every member, it's simply a contract the authority approves and the member or customer purchasing water approves. The authority then maintains a document at the authority that talks about allocation and allocation money distribution. So it doesn't have to go vote to change those tables which are currently in the master water supply contract. Concept would be to do it with independent contracts that would be short. They're just, I want 5, and the cost is already defined. We tell them what that cost is. They sign the contract. It's going to be part of the, at this point, to be part of the new third reservoir. So that's the kind of concept we're looking at to make that easier. Along with that goes something else. Right now, the delivery points, which is a key issue. I don't think it's very controversial though, but delivery points right now are also included in the master water supply contract. So in order to change one, in theory, even though the contract had a different process, to make it binding, you would have to have every customer that signed, all 5 of them, go back and amend the contract and add on a new delivery point. I think the better way to do that, especially when some people that may be wanting to have a new delivery point aren't even customers. I mean, they could be Inglewood, or they could be Bradenton. So the idea would be instead come up with a delivery points that are maintained at the authority, and every year the board would approve them. And when someone wants to add one, we do it by separate contract, like what he was talking about with the connection fee. And so then new delivery points could be added, or you could change an existing delivery point if you wanted to, without having to amend the contract. And that's basically the concepts that deal with this new water allocation process and how you would go and ask for and request water and have that request locked in. And kind of going second with that, that's section 11, is our future water supply procedure. And this is one where, over 16 years it's evolved. How do we actually do this? Well, we actually do it one way, and the contract says something different. So the idea would be, let's modify the contract to the way it's actually done between the member governments and the authority. And maybe let's look at some new concepts that we can put in there, something that would work smoother after 16 years of experience. Mr. Coates and member governments have looked at different ways to do this that work better, work with your professional staffs, come up with a new process that would fit in with the new way we're going to do water source deliveries, if that's something we need to do. And I'm saying these discussion points, that's exactly what it is. These are discussions that need to be had, concepts need to be developed, at least agreed to in concept, and then start to write them up and get approval. Because remember, whatever we do in the master water supply contract has to be approved by all of the member county boards and by the city of Northport. So, yeah, and that means you have to work with everyone. The rate setting section, we talked about some of the changes that were done to that. The changes are basically taking you into a position in the future where we knew this would happen back in 2005. In 2028, you'll get to something called a common debt service. So the debt service amount will be the same, and will be allocated by percentages, but it will be the same interest rate for everybody. It will be the same debt service pro-allocated, pro-rata to everyone. So it's a common debt service. So then what's happening is, I call it the debt pool, and all the financial people wins, because they're like, who's ever heard of that term? But with all the loans that are made for water supply sources, not pipelines, they're separate. They're all going to be treated as if it's one big loan, and then pro rata percentage to each member. And that's the way the contract was set up. So it brings you closer to, okay, what is everyone paying for? They're all paying for one source. So we don't know what source your water is actually coming from. When you add on the new reservoir, does your water come out of the old reservoir, the new reservoir, or the third reservoir? Well, there's no way to tell. And actually, like you were pointing out, it's all kind of combined together like the pipelines. So that's a better way maybe of looking at it and discussing that. So those are the concepts, there's a couple more, that we looked at so far, and I was saying that we just got 3 more. Pipeline hydraulic capacity is exactly what you were talking about, Commissioner Cruz. So the idea on that is, we've got this concept of a connection fee, but is there something else that we should look at from there for long term? So that we could eventually make it to, and maybe we can't get very far this time, or maybe we can, so that there's maybe a uniform pipeline charge. Right now, we've tried to segment, and there's all these different contracts out there for pipelines. Does it make sense to start a process, not do it instantaneously, but start a process that in the next 10 or 20 years, where we merge into where we have a pipeline that's paid, maintenance paid by everyone shared based on their allocation, and the cost of new pipelines handled the same way. The idea that you have an interconnected system, we have loops, we have different supplies coming online. The concept and the philosophy you have in your plan going forward is this idea that we'll be providing water, but also members may be putting water into the system. So you have water that could go both directions. You have people that may be supplying water at some times, so that we can get this true system that we've all thought of and conceived of since Southern Water Use Cautionary came in, where we, between Manatee and Peace River, most of this region's groundwater is surface water and not overtaxing the aquifer. And in those times when the surface water supplies aren't available, we're able to then use the groundwater supplies called conjunctive use and be able to maximize the use of the surface water by being able to have the groundwater in backup of those times of drought. So that's part of the process of that, is looking at a fully integrated system. Well, then you'd have to fully integrate the pipeline costs. It'd be impossible to say this little segment is yours when all members potentially are using it. So that's a broader concept, a longer discussion. I don't think we can get there in like one contract resolution, but I think what we can do is we can put something in the contract that anticipates or kicks off this process that gets us there in 10 or 20 years. 6 is kind of a specific provision. That's what I've got on my list. It's at 22.3. You can scan up there. I wrongly call this the veto provision. And the level of distrust was very high, like so many did this contract. And it not only allowed, sorry, it's emphasis to the point. It not only allows,
I woke up a few people.
So if you're an exclusive customer like DeSoto County, you don't have this approval veto process. Exclusive customers agree that authority infrastructure can be placed, and there's without having to have an independent approval. But say Charlotte County wanted to run a pipeline up and not serve anybody in Sarasota County, but you guys are right next to each other, up into Sarasota County and then back down into Charlotte. Well, if you're under this contract, each one of the member governments, each one of the customers are obligated to ask the other county permission to site that pipeline. And if that permission is not granted, you have to withdraw the permit application and you can't build that pipeline or infrastructure. Again, this might go to the idea of putting a connection fee in for somebody and having one member government, and the rest of the authority wants to have this new person tap into the line, but the member government says, I'm not going to let you put that pipeline there. I'm not going to let you put that connection onto the pipeline. So it kind of can be hindering. The other part of it, which is more understandable, that part, about pipelines and little connection fees and pumping stations, that doesn't really, in my opinion, make very much sense. That why we have that, so that one county can veto or Northport can veto what Sarasota's doing. The other thing was more of a common concept, which was if you're going to locate a new water source and it's going to be in my jurisdiction, then the authority has to get approval to put it there. It would be wonderful if that could be done away with, because that we're all in this together. We get it. We all need water supply. But there's two parts to this veto. I think the pipeline infrastructure part that doesn't have to do with water sources really should go away. And it's outdated and it really doesn't make much sense. The other part is a very big policy decision. Both of them are policy decisions, but this one's a big one, whether or not you want to take over the provision that if the authority wanted to cite, and right now we don't have any plans to do this, but if we wanted to cite a withdrawal facility in Manatee County, then the idea would we'd go and we'd have to get approval from Manatee County to place that source in there. That's more controversial. That might be something you want to retain. You might not. It just depends on where you want to go with that philosophy. And the last one is whether or not we need to discuss this. Right now, we were looked at back in 2005 that each one of you would get what your water allocation was. But there's another thing when you become a regional supplier and you get larger. Everybody keeps growing and you get closer and closer to the permitted amount that you have. And just with your own wastewater permits and water supplies. When you get within 15% of use to your permitted cap, you know, you're required under your DEP permits for wastewater to start planning to build that next wastewater facility. Well, right now, what we're talking about is the potential of clarifying water supply capacity that the authority can hold to include this potential, whatever the cushion would be, 15%. So that we say we're coming up and we're providing 50 million gallons, that's what we're permitted to. And when we get within 15% of 50 million gallons, in the authority automatically, pursuant to this contract, has to start looking for new water supply and developing that permitting and going forward to make sure that we don't get to this demand and this permitted cap. All right, that's a lot, and that's why, you know, we've waited to give a workshop to talk to you about it. And I'm open for questions, but I also want to hear what you think about the idea of continuing discussions in those 7 areas. You know, my idea is just to take this professional staff, talk about the update, but then also talk about either separately at the same time these new concepts. And if you are willing to go forward and direct us to do so, then we'll bring those up as well during these discussions with professional staff.
Who has some questions? Anyone? Okay. At this point, you've given us an awful lot, so I guess the questions, we'll think of them while we're sleeping tonight and then at the next session.
Thank you.
Is that it, Doug? That's it for this workshop?
Yeah, that was it for the workshop. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to finish up with? On what our next steps are would be talking with the professional staff about the contract updates and then wanting to get some guidance from you all as we go forward.
Yeah, I hope that at least we can get with the professional staff and perhaps the administrators to talk about the cleanup of the contract. I think that's not terribly controversial, but a step at a time. And then at the next meeting, we can talk a little bit more, the next meeting of this board, we can talk a little bit more about the concepts that Doug just went through and maybe get a little more in detail on those, if that's what the board would like to do.
Yeah, I kind of like to strike out and underline that's just a list I have to read. So, but no, I mean, get rid of some stuff that I've seen on here that you pointed out in the very beginning. That's a no-brainer. I mean, it's just stuff that really don't need to be in there anymore. And it really doesn't. I don't think it weakens the agreement at all by getting rid of stuff I think that isn't relative to this anymore. So I'm okay with that. Letting our staff go ahead and look at it, see and bring us something back that you all want to look at.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, we'll agree. Well, I'll just make this one last comment to you all. What a joy it is being inside our 4 counties, where we're talking about more pipelines, a big new reservoir. Instead of what our fellow Americans are going through with drastic, punishing water reductions and crippling farms and people and everything else, we just, thanks to what everyone else did long before I got here, most of us got here in setting this up, we just are in an absolutely great place. And I think we need to impress upon people how good this is. It's also not what the poor people out in Flint, Michigan went through, or other places that I read about where there's still lead contamination in their water supply. So this is a big deal. If there's nothing else, Mike, I think for the workshop, we will adjourn and look for another 5 minutes you need in the future to just settle all this, Doug, and then we're set, right?
Yeah.
Good. Good. God bless you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, so I was a little hesitant just yeah. Just probably need to enter